here on campus. We're so thrilled that you all made it out tonight for our special guest this evening. We have Steve Jarchow in town. He received his BBA, MS, as well as his JD right here from the University of Wisconsin. Jarchow is the chairman of Here Media and Regent Entertainment with over 25 years of experience in successful entertainment and law ventures, as well as real estate. We also have Professor Emeritus Tino Balio to moderate the event. So without further ado, let's give a warm welcome to Tino and Steve.
Well, thank you very much for coming, and I'm going to be pitching questions to Steve, but if you have any questions during our discussion, please raise your hand. We'd be happy to recognize you. We're going to be covering a broad range of topics on the contemporary film industry, so I'll lob Steve a real easy one to begin. Ever since 2000, the film industry has undergone significant changes that you have lived through, no doubt, if you've been paying attention and going to the movies. The first big change occurred with the bursting of the dot-com bubble, which took down AOL Time Warner. Then there was the decline in DVD sales, and of course the recession, and changing viewer habits. All these things happened within a relatively short span of time, and that are still affecting the film industry. So Steve, what are some of these major changes that have taken place, and how has your company responded to them?
Well, unfortunately, Tino, this is not a lob. This is a curveball, which I've always had a difficult time getting. So, but I appreciate the question. This is one of those times in the entertainment business when everything is changing all the time. And even the changes that have occurred in the last 5 to 10 years are changing as we speak. You know, you are, for the most part, natural, and your natural environment is the digital world. I'm an immigrant to that world, although I run a company that is largely digital at this point. As Tino indicated, there have been a number of fundamental changes, and let me try to kind of walk you through it succinctly, so we're not here all night just on this one topic, because this could take hours and even days if we wanted to spend the time on it. First of all, you know, I've been making movies and selling movies for about 20 years now, and for the first 8 to 10 years, it was a fairly straightforward and fairly good business. Our business was manufacturing movies at reasonable prices and selling them hopefully for more than we invested in. The traditional way that one sold a movie in the independent field outside the studio system was to either sell the movies to the studios, sell them to DVD companies who would then distribute them, or if you had your own DVD company, distribute them directly. And then internationally, you would have salespeople who would go from market to market and country to country selling your films. And each territory would have varying prices, and rights would have varying prices. And the rights were fairly straightforward and simple as recently as 10 years ago. You had television, DVD, and theatrical, and little variations of those. So it was a lot like selling shoes for a lot of these people, and most of them were about as smart as shoe salesmen. The major markets consisted of the American film market, which traditionally was held in Santa Monica. There were 2 TV markets in Cannes, and then the Cannes Film Festival and Market, because it's both. And then there were a variety of other festivals and markets that gradually were gathering momentum for independent film, including Toronto, Sundance, Berlin, and then now markets that are arising in Hong Kong and Tokyo and other places. And you would listen carefully to what your buyers wanted. they were normally buying for television or for DVD, sometimes for theatrical. And while it was a difficult business, and a lot of companies were going broke doing it, because manufacturing movies for a reasonable price was not easy, it was a doable business, and it was a straightforward business, and it was a business that people had done in the same way for many, many years. Then things started to change. First of all, there had been a frenzy of buying activity about 10, 12 years ago coming out of Germany, largely because of the media companies that went public on what was called the Nur stock market. That market gave billion-dollar and multiple billion-dollar valuations, not unlike the dot-com boom, to companies that had very little substance. They were basically glorified sales companies. And huge prices were being paid in Germany and then throughout Europe for movies. And so it was a very good time. All of a sudden that market collapsed. And Germany has basically disappeared as a buyer, despite having the most robust economy in all of Europe during the last 10 years. What has happened there is that Germans have largely gone to indigenous or their own productions. They bought from elsewhere in Europe, and they have made major output deals with the studios. So they agreed to buy a number of movies from the studios. And this gradually matriculated throughout Europe and through much of the rest of the world. So the first thing that happened is the pricing that was being paid for movies outside the studio system for independent films dropped precipitously to probably 50% or less of what it had been previously. So that wasn't good, but one could adjust to that. Movies that you would make for $2 million, you now would make for $800,000. Now, it's not easy to make a really good movie with good stars for $800,000. But then the prices dropped again. And now you had to make these movies for $500,000 or $600,000. That may seem like a lot of money, but it's a difficult task to make something that's competitive for television and for the theaters and even for DVD at those prices. But we made it work. Then you began to see a variety of other small changes. The major change that occurred was the gradual disappearance of the DVD market. Because for many, many years, independent companies had survived largely on DVD sales. When the VHS was in vogue, before DVDs, they would buy practically anything. They were so desperate for product. But those years are long, long gone. And DVDs continued to be a viable source of revenue. We would often make a movie for what we would get in DVD sales, and the rest would be profit. But that began to evaporate about 8 to 10 years ago. And DVD prices declined, not precipitously immediately, but ultimately along a line like this, and then all of a sudden collapsed completely. The reason for it was that people were receiving their content in other ways. And you all know this from your own experience. Look at the ways that you can see movies and other shows and television shows today that you couldn't 3-4 years ago. Virtually everything you want is either free or available at a very low cost digitally. That's fine, and it is excellent to say power to the people, and people should have everything free online, which is what the companies in Silicon Valley feel very strongly about, because they are basically providing the trail upon which this content can be received, but it really doesn't reward
those who manufacture the content in a meaningful way at a time when prices have already dropped very dramatically. The DVD market today has almost completely disappeared for independent companies. Titles that we used to receive $400,000 or $500,000 in DVD revenue will now receive under $100,000, sometimes as little as $25,000 to $50,000, and that's it. That's a huge revenue source disappeared for independent film. And there is an argument that video is, at least to a certain extent, going in kind of the same direction that the music business went. And I suspect most of you have observed that or studied it a bit. The music business was one of the easiest and stupidest businesses around for years and years and years. You could be a complete idiot and make a fortune in the music business. Until the sales of CDs evaporated. That doesn't mean you still don't buy CDs sometimes, but virtually all the music you can now receive digitally for very little cost and often free. That business, a business which would pay huge salaries to executives, and a business that would reward artists in dramatic ways, has virtually disappeared. There kind of is no music business anymore, other than occasional people that break through because of their unusual talent or their unusual position in the industry. You see that occasionally with an Adele or a Taylor Swift or a Katy Perry or somebody like that. It's pretty unusual. It isn't like even 10 years ago where there were probably 200 groups that were able to make a living off the sale of their music. Virtually no one can make a living on the sale of their music in the traditional ways, the CD or the equivalent of an album or a record. By the way, my parents, who are 88 and 86, still listen to records every night and drink sherry. They're 88 and 86. You can't discourage them. They seem to be very happy. So today, you do see some money being made in the music business through concerts and events. But that is largely restricted to groups that are very old or very new. And most of them are not really making a living doing it. So now let's move to back to the video business. And by video business, I mean the video business broadly defined, however you see video content. Well, okay, DVDs have disappeared largely as a source of revenue for independents. They're a questionable and very fragile source of revenue for the major studios. Because right now, all of the major studios want to be part of this digital change. They want their content to be available in all the different ways that you are used to receiving it, but it is undermining huge sources of revenue that they've had in the past. And so they're very schizophrenic about the whole thing. They're uncertain how to play this. And it really requires adeptness and fleetness of foot to do this, and it's always changing on them. And they're not people that handle change very well, particularly. They're like faculty members. It's very hard for them. Pino accepted. It's a real time where they want to be part of this, but it's undermining their theatrical releases, it is destroying their DVD revenue, and it is also undermining their cable networks, which most of them own. Most of them own either broadcast networks or advertiser-supported or premium subscription-supported cable networks. And all of them are embattled by the fact that you now have Netflix streaming, and Netflix is still out there despite some horrendous business mistakes. You have Hulu, which is owned by the studios, but they don't even like it. They tried to sell it and they were unsuccessful, and they don't know what to do with it quite, because it is the future, or it is a version of what the future might look like, but it really competes with their traditional outlets. You've got Google, YouTube. Now there's something that didn't even exist in any meaningful form 5-6 years ago. I mean, YouTube is, is really brand new. And now you have traditional product produced by professional filmmakers competing with user-generated talent, user-generated content. That didn't exist before. And a lot of people prefer the user-generated content. You also have a phenomenon called reality television in its various forms, ranging from the Kardashians and Jersey Shore and the wives of whichever city you're interested in, and some of the most ridiculous behavior you have ever witnessed, to shows that arguably have some merit, that look at various professions, look at various dangerous situations, cooking shows, all sorts of things like that, which existed in a very mild format 10 to 15 years ago, but now have sort of taken over television, as evidenced by the cancellation of soap operas. And there used to be roughly 8 major soap operas on television, there are now 4. And those 4 are scrambling to stay in position. Now, we as a firm are not particularly skilled at reality TV. We do it for a network we own called Here TV, but it's not something that I know very much about or watch very much of or enjoy particularly, but as you know, it's extremely popular. I also don't watch Dancing with the Stars very often or any of the competitive shows, but they are an important part of what people watch, and they compete with the story form content that filmmakers have tried to put on the air either as movies or series for years. In addition, you as viewers do not really want appointment TV. You don't really want to wait for a particular evening to watch the show you want to watch. And you may even want to watch multiple episodes of a show. Well, you now have the availability to do that, and it's unclear how that's going to work completely with the revenue models that the major studios and the major broadcast networks and cable services have worked off of for years and has been very profitable for them for years. Appointment TV is kind of going away. Now, even at my advanced age, it is going away for me. I don't enjoy hurrying home. My schedule's much too busy to be home on a particular evening. I'd rather go out, or I like going out to the movies. And we'll get to that in just a moment in terms of how the theaters are attempting to respond to what's going on. But there's only really 1 or 2 shows, Downton Abbey and The Killing, that I will make a point to being home on a particular time, and I know I could watch them online if I wanted to, but it's frankly just too much trouble. I'd rather be home on a Sunday night. That's the one night I could be home. And I can schedule, accordingly, because I'm really not going to be running around. I have to work the next day. So I will go home and I will watch those shows, although I always screw up when they're on, because I live both in Dallas and Los Angeles, so I always get confused as to what time they're on. And so I just have to kind of go through the guide and figure it out. But most people do not like that anymore, particularly young people who are natives to the digital world. And that means that it's very hard for that to continue as a revenue model. In addition, TV and the movies have a lot of competition they never had before. Video games. video games are bigger than the movies right now in terms of revenue. And when you have a hit as a video game, it can be bigger than any movie, with the exception of the Hunger Games, which is an aberration, but a useful one. In video games, you will miss on 10 or 15 video games until you hit one that goes. That's about the same record as major studio movies. In addition, people spend a lot of time just on the internet, on Facebook, dating, doing all the different things you do on the internet. That didn't exist 10 years ago. No one did that. And if it did exist, it was very, very geekish, and it wasn't something that people did on a regular basis. Now it's for everyone. It's only been 10 years since all that has happened. So what we have right now is a very, very changing, very schizophrenic world where everything is moving and hurtling very quickly, and the major studios don't know what to do about it, and the independents in general do not know what to do about it as well. Now, let's talk just a moment, and then I'll be quiet on this question, because it is a long question, or a long answer, short question. With respect to the theaters, I like going to the movie theaters. I enjoy it a great deal. And in either Los Angeles or Dallas, you have lots of choices to go to the movie theater. I like going to foreign films. I like going to independent films. I like going to big studio films. I'm one of the 3 people in the United States that enjoyed John Carter. I also like The Hunger Games, but my favorite movie that I saw in the last 2 years was a Canadian Jordanian film called Incendies. If anyone has a chance to see that, that's a movie that is both horrifying and uplifting at the same time. And the final moments of that movie are some of the most horrifying and shocking I have ever seen, but also some of the most uplifting. And when a movie does that, that's about as much as you can ask for. Now the studios are really going to 3D. This is not unlike what happened in the 1950s and 60s when they were losing viewership to television, as television just started out with 3 mighty channels at that time, all in black and white. But the studios were afraid, and often they did 3D movies at that time. And now, for myself, I'm not a particular fan of 3D. But people seem to like it for certain movies. The reason I don't like it is very simple. I have to wear 2 pairs of glasses. And it's just awkward and clumsy, and I feel stupid. But people like 3D, and some of the movies I've seen have done a very good job with 3D. I don't know if any of you have seen Hugo. That was really an excellent use of 3D and really integrated you into the story. And there are other good uses, but there are some movies that it makes no sense whatsoever. I am not a great believer in the fact that 3D is going to attract a huge additional audience. I know it makes the ticket prices a lot more expensive, which I don't like. But I don't think it's the answer, but I could be dead wrong about this. And I tend to like just a regular movie. I like the big movies and I like the small movies. I like them both. And I like to be surprised every so often by something that I didn't expect. And so I hope, but I can't guarantee you, that people will still enjoy going out to the theaters because it's an opportunity to get out, be among people, and there's something about the communal experience of being with a lot of other people in the dark, seeing something that you haven't seen before, and experiencing with others, laughing with others, and even crying with others. And I hope that continues to stay a unique experience. But today you have so many different ways you can see video, see movies, that it's unclear that it will be quite the force it's been in the past. It wasn't so very long ago that 50 years, which to me doesn't seem very long, that most people did not have television. All of these other devices we've been talking about, these other ways of seeing content, did not exist. And people used to go out to the movies 2-3 times a week. And movies would move in and out of the theaters very quickly. And people really looked forward to it. It was really the social experience. Well, now you have all sorts of other social experiences, and you have dozens of different ways to view content and to socialize with one another. And so the future for the movies is very unclear, probably the most unclear it has been since the advent of television back in the 50s and 60s.
Okay, you covered a lot of ground, very interesting. Any questions before I, yes?
Do you mean about what was just spoken about, or just questions in general?
Regarding the material that we have covered, we can save other questions later on, but we could move on.
You'll have a chance to ask whatever you want later on.
Okay, how has the recession impacted the business? Has it, are the movies recession-proof?
No. I think it has driven a lot of companies out of business, particularly independent companies. It has further reduced the value of libraries, and we have a very large film library comprised of about 3,500 titles, of which I've made about 150 of them, and the rest we bought. Right now, libraries are valued very low. There are not many buyers for them. The economic collapse has meant a lack of banking, a lack of financing. It's not all bad, because the hedge funds were very aggressive in the last 10 years and made some unwise choices along the way. Really did not know what they were doing and negotiated some deals that were not as thoughtful and careful as they should have been. We were at a point where the investment banks in particular, and the hedge funds and private equity firms, were basically trying to securitize everything. And films were one thing they tried to securitize. And unfortunately, few of them knew what they were doing. I have a dispute right now with a large securities firm who remain unnamed. A dispute we are winning, but one that has probably cost me a couple $1 million in legal fees. And I basically negotiated a deal myself without an outside lawyer. I'm a lawyer, but I haven't practiced law since 1981. I negotiated a deal with Sidley and Austin, a large law firm on the other side, and 8 guys from Merrill Lynch, which is a securities firm that will remain unnamed. And their complaint is that I took advantage of them. That was their complaint. We've gradually come around to the real issues, which is they aren't happy with the deal they made. But it's all going to work out. We're getting our library back. It's been a very tough ordeal while you're trying to run a business to have a litigation. But litigation in the movie business is pretty common. You make money on a movie, you get sued because people think they aren't getting their share. You lose money in a movie, people sue because you lost money on the movie. You break even, they don't like that either. They probably sue them as well. I went through the first 25 years of my business career with 1 or 2 lawsuits. Since I got in the movie business 20 years ago, you always have something going on, some sort of nonsense with somebody. And I'm not sure why that is exactly. It may be that people react a little more emotionally. It may be that the movie business is a very complex business. The financings are very complex. I did not fully appreciate how these deals were done when I started doing this. I originally got involved because I'd been involved in other businesses, both in this country and overseas for many years, and I thought I would like to try this. And I had bought a property in Dallas called the Studios at Las Colinas, which was a movie production facility, and people mistakenly thought I was in the movie business. I was really in the facilities business. I owned a real estate property. But they started showing me things, and I started acquiring movie rights. And then I decided that what I had better do is learn something about this. So I went to the law school at SMU, Southern Methodist University in Dallas, and I said, would you like a course in entertainment law? And they said, sure. And I said, well, okay, I'd like to teach it. And they said, fine. They didn't know I didn't know anything about it. But a good way to learn something is to try to teach it. Because then you have to really read everything and really understand it. And it was an invaluable experience for me. And I learned so much. And I continued to buy and sell movie rights. But the value of those rights after the recession has dropped precipitously. What does that mean? It means you don't get much credit from the banks in terms of what you own, and we have one of the largest libraries in the world. However, it's a great time to be a buyer, because other people can't sell their stuff either. So our job is to buy as intelligently as we can the right things. And that has to include the digital rights, because that's the future. That is where you're going to make money, although how it's going to play out is not completely clear. But the big effect of the recession has been now a lack of financing and a reduction in the value of libraries and the value of the collateral that you have. The things that go down come back up. And our job right now is to be a buyer. And so we have been busy buying libraries and bailing out people in trouble. And it's much like the real estate market that I worked in the 1980s, where there was an opportunity to buy buildings at very reasonable prices. Nobody wanted to buy anything. Everybody was selling. All the banks were dumping all this stuff. So this is a great time to be a buyer, and we're trying to carefully accumulate. If they do not have the digital rights, we can't be a buyer. Now, we can buy the digital rights, interestingly enough, on a non-exclusive basis, because the digital market has developed as a non-exclusive world. You can license these rights non-exclusively. Very different from how television networks and DVD companies operated, where they wanted exclusive. And there are still buyers, like Netflix, who will occasionally want exclusive rights. But you can buy this stuff and sell it and license it non-exclusively. That's very different. The reason for that is because this stuff is available everywhere. So they don't care that someone else is playing it. They just want to have content that they can use under their brand. And what it really means is you have to have very valuable brands. And you have to have a product that is attractive for people, because otherwise they'll go and get the stuff for free.
Good. Okay, since you mentioned briefly your entree into the movie business, do you have any advice as to how any of these people here might move into the film business if they care to?
Well, first of all, only do it if you have no other option. And only if it's because you are, it means so much to you that you have to do it, that this is what you want to do. I am very fortunate on some level because I didn't get involved full-time in the motion picture business until I was in my 40s. And I brought to that years and years of real estate deals. I'd practiced law for 5 years. I'd done business in many different foreign countries with different laws and different rules. I had seen friends killed as a result of business deals in Russia. I had experienced a lot of different things. If I had gone in as a naive 25-year-old, I'm speaking of myself, not you, of course, I would have really gotten myself in a lot of trouble. As it is, I was able to deal with the business and life. What you will find is, in life, you have 1 foot in a rose garden and 1 foot in quicksand. The rose garden gives you hope. The quicksand gives you excitement. And that's the way the movie business is. It is up and down all the time. And you will have many more frustrations, failures, than you will have successes. When I talk to someone about my career, and they ask me to describe it, I will say ignorance, failure, problem, lawsuit, another problem, success, more problems, a couple more successes, and then an absolute disaster, from which you recover and have another success. Now let's talk about you. The basic thing that you can do is try to understand the digital changes occurring in your world. And that is natural to you. That's something you deal with every day of your life. But go beyond just a superficial understanding of what is taking place and read everything you can, study everything you can, understand what apps are doing to the business. Understand how apps are going to be replaced by HTML5. Understand all of the changes that are taking place, because the entertainment business has now become a combination of Silicon Valley and Hollywood. And you may find that your careers take you to San Francisco in that area instead of to Los Angeles. Now, if you're interested in the theater, or opera, or classical music, New York is where you want to go. If you're interested in being involved in the theater, New York, or even London are places to go. If you're interested in the movies, broadly defined to mean all video, then have a strong digital background and expect that your experience and your direction will be part of that. The way I did it was to read everything I could. And for me at that point, it meant books rather than going online quite as much, although I did go online quite a bit. It meant reading everything I could. Reading the histories of the studios, understanding the problems they have gone through, and appreciating the fact that while we all think our problems are the worst and the most difficult, everyone around us has problems. There isn't a person in this room that doesn't have something that they just think is the worst problem in the world. Unless you lead a golden life, and there aren't too many of you around. All of us are faced with family illnesses, school problems, grade problems, relationship problems, career problems. We're all like that. None of us are unique in our problems. Frankly, I find that reassuring. I'm not the only one. I'm not the only one that feels insecure and worried about what's going to happen next, and whether I can meet payroll next month, or whether I can deal with this dispute over something, or a tough phone call I have to make on Monday. All of us have to do it. So the second thing, after gaining as much of an understanding as you can of the digital side of the business, is to understand that nobody gets out of here alive. Life is really, really tough. But if you can play it a point at a time, take each day, and not get too frustrated, and not get too worried. And there's a problem for folks like you and I. It's that we are taught that we should think. We should think our way out of problems. But the problem is the mind is buzzing all the time then. And it can fill you all full of worries, and all full of concerns. So the second thing you kind of need to do is stop thinking a little bit. Quiet that mind and concentrate on what's right in front of you. It's like a tennis game. You play the game a point at a time. You can't worry about the last point, you can't worry about the next point. You play it a point at a time. And your job is not even to win that point. Your job is to do the best job you can on that point. And hit the ball back as much as you can and never give up. And that really segues to the third piece of advice. You never give up. You never stop. They can throw you out of the office, but you come on back. Never, never give up. Because you will be amazed what will happen if you don't give up and you don't stop. And you just keep on going. I know it sounds trite and a little new agey, and I don't mean it that way, but don't give up. It's almost as if each of us is guided by unseen hands. And your life sort of goes the way it's supposed to go. And it may be so hard and so difficult sometimes. And the reversals may seem too much for you. Don't let it get you down. These things change. Everything changes. No matter how bad or how good it seems to be, it all changes. Now, in terms of specifics, the time-honored way to get into the entertainment business is to go out to Los Angeles and to knock on doors and call people. That is certainly still a viable technique because people are incredibly generous with their time. They like talking to young people. But before you do that, read as much as you can, study as much as you can, understand what their business is. What is it that they do before you call them up? And then what do you say? You explain, you tell the truth. You can always lie, but it's not a very useful technique. And tell them who you are and what you're interested in. Would they give you some of their time? You'd like to ask them some questions. It is a time-honored technique, and it still works. If some young person calls me up, I will meet with them. If I possibly can. Maybe a few weeks, because I may be gone, or I may be too jammed for the moment. And most people are like that. Now, if you're educated in the law or in accounting, not a bad way to start is to start out with a law firm or an accounting firm. Particularly one that you've studied and done your homework and you know has an entertainment practice or has something to do with that business. That's a good way to start. Even working as a receptionist or as a helper in the stockroom is not a bad way to start, no matter how educated you are. I have an assistant named Lorian, who's the best assistant I've ever had in the history of all the businesses I've been in. I've had a hard time, frankly, finding good assistants who could keep up with me. This woman is a linguistics graduate, and she had worked as a line producer on some pictures, and she started out as a receptionist. My assistant quit because she was a little insane, And later on proved that by attempting to kill herself by throwing herself off a building, not recognizing it was only the second story, and she was unsuccessful. So I needed a new assistant. And I was told, well, why don't you try Lorian? She seems like a very smart person. Why don't you try her? I said, I don't, okay. So I sat down and interviewed her, and I thought, my God, this person's smarter than I am. So I hired her as my assistant, and she is, by her own admission, an odd person. Never wants to get married, heterosexual, loves her job, dedicated, smart as can be, and now I've promoted her. I have a new assistant who's a young man, and seems to be very smart and very technically oriented, very technologically oriented. He's a few weeks into it, and I've promoted Lorian to an executive position, and she's going to be running a whole division within the company. She started out as a receptionist, and she just was a smart, smart person, and I would not have made it through the dangers and travails of the last 2.5 years without her assistance. She handled so much. I owe her so much for having taken over responsibility for tough, tough issues and handling them so expertly and so well. Now, having said that, she does drive me crazy because she questions everything I do. And she wants to rewrite everything I do, and I'm not a bad writer. I've written 5 books. So I'm competent, or at least semi-competent as a writer. But fortunately, being the boss, I can overrule her and say, no, we're going to do it my way. But she comes in, and she has a comment on everything. And she questions everything I do. And I've encouraged that. But she's a person that started out with a fairly menial job, and she is incredibly valuable to me now. I don't know what I would have done without her, with all the things we've had to deal with this economy and with all the problems. Now, I want to say that when I started reading books about the business, I focused on the moguls and the operations of the studios. And Tino wrote what to me was the singular most valuable book I read, which is his 2-volume series on United Artists, the history of United Artists. And I think it's the best thing out there. So I will recommend that to all of you. Because it reads like a good novel, yet it contains extraordinary detail about all the mistakes that were made by the initial regime, which consisted of movie stars and a director, sort of like the inmates taking over the asylum. And then later on consisted of lawyers and businessmen who had a good creative sense and who made excellent judgments for many, many years until they made a very bad judgment, which was to sell their company by merger. And kind of ruined everything they had created on some level by taking that one bad act, which taught me a very valuable lesson. Be very careful when you sell your company. Success is one thing. Building a business that's valuable, and one of the businesses we own is a company called Here Media, which owns most of the gay and lesbian-oriented media in the United States. It consists of Out Magazine, The Advocate, which is 45 years old, HIV+, Gay.com, the website, She Wired, and it is the place to go if you are an advertiser and want to advertise to this audience. If you looked at our magazines, you will see the best advertisers, and it also has subscription services. And it's a digital company, but we also have magazine publications, and that's a business that can work if combined with a robust digital presence. Because people still like to read magazines, even you guys occasionally. And there's a place for print in today's world, but it's a different place and it needs a digital component. That business is going to be, in the next 3 to 4 years, ripe for selling. And that sale could either be the smartest thing I do or the biggest mistake I make. And I learned that from Tino's book, as well as other things I've experienced over the years. What other suggestions could I make to you? Well, I'll tell you, learning the digital world and knowing everything you can about that is the best advice I can give you, because that's going to be everything going forward.
Thank you, Steve. I'll open it up though for questions. Yes, good, thank you.
I actually did have a question about your media, because I'm writing a story right now about a gay Israeli filmmaker. I was thinking of pitching it to Out Magazine, and I happened to be Googling that evening, and I saw that there was breaking news that the editor-in-chief had just laid off the editorial staff at Out. And I just wonder what factors influenced your media's decision to support the editor-in-chief doing that?
Sure. That is really a topical question. First of all, with respect to the article you're talking about, that is probably an article that's more appropriate for The Advocate, which is a news magazine, than Out Magazine. Out Magazine is a fashion magazine.
Yeah, it's a fashion story.
So, and it is a magazine that appeals primarily to gay men
Yeah.
who are very fashion oriented, whereas The Advocate appeals to both women and men, and not even just to lesbians. We have a substantial heterosexual subscriber base to The Advocate. And The Advocate is a magazine that is exactly what it is. It is an advocate for fairness and equal rights for all sorts of constituencies, but it has a gay and lesbian orientation. Let me tell you what we did with Out. We have an excellent editor, and that magazine, he is the face of. For some time, he has wanted to form his own company. And he's a very talented guy. We could live without him, but we'd rather not. So we came up with an idea, and this was my business partner Paul Collishman's idea. It may be a brilliant idea or a bad idea. I did not participate in it, so I can judge it very objectively. And what we've done is we've outsourced the publication of that magazine to a new company that Aaron is forming. It's going to save us a ton of money because we don't have to employ all these people, and we're going to pay him a set fee to produce this magazine each month. I think there are 10 issues a year, so it's a little less than a month. But everything has to be approved by us, and we can fire him at any time. Or fire his company more correctly. And we decided we didn't want to lose him. We wanted to keep him as a talent. He was, he's a gay man in his mid-40s. He was experiencing what many men in their mid-40s experience, which is, the change of life, where they have their midlife crisis. And he wanted to have his own business. So we thought, well, this is a way we can do it, and we believe it's going to save the company about $500,000 to $600,000 a year, which was important to us. And the reason we're able to do that is because we lose a whole bunch of employees. We lose a lot of the inherent costs, and we may do the same, if this works, we may do the same with The Advocate. If it doesn't work, we'll bring it back in-house. And we'll either rehire him as editor or we'll hire a new editor. But that's why we did it. And it's an experiment. When we bought these magazines, they were losing about $15 million a year under the previous management. We now have them profitable, all three of them. This is potentially a way to meet Aaron Hinckley's needs, and also a way to make the magazine more profitable. We also feel that the real growth for Out is not with the physical publication. We've kind of taken it as far as we can go. The real growth for Out is on the digital side, as it is for The Advocate, and expanding our website presence, which he's not going to be involved in, although it'll work side by side. We have a separate group that handles the digital side of our business. And they work with the print people very closely, but they don't need to be the same people. And the growth of this business is going to be primarily internationally. It's going to be digital. and that's where we can grow the business. And we think that's potentially worth tens of millions to us, whereas we think we've done about all we can do with the print side. But he takes such pride in this, and this is so important to him, to have this be a success, that we felt that sometimes you have to work with an employee who has a particular interest or need, and that's what we decided to do. Might be a terrible mistake, but that's what you do in business all the time. You take chances on things like this. So that's the reason for it.
Yes.
Going back to the beginning of when you started talking about how there's this opposition to the transition to digital media, Hollywood's been targeting this both legally by making it harder for Netflix to acquire streaming rights and illegally by trying to pass controversial legislation through Congress. And both of these haven't been as successful as they hoped. What do you think is going to be the next step of Hollywood studios in trying to stop the spread of online digital streaming, or are they going to be beginning to finally realize that there's nothing they can do and are going to accept it and work with this transition?
I don't know. But I can editorialize a little bit and attempt to give you some color. How this is going to be play out is unclear. And you've asked a wonderful question. I don't know that it's, and I want to make sure I understood the word you used. You said that they were pursuing it legally.
I mean both legal streaming and illegal downloading piracy.
Okay, you were referring to not necessarily the illegal acts of the studio, but rather the pursuing illegal downloading. Is that do I
Yes.
understand correct? Okay, because it's certainly appropriate for them to lobby for legislation. Whether they'll prevail or not is far from clear, because the Silicon Valley lobby is as well financed or better financed than the studios are and the producers of content. And a lot of producers of content are small companies or individuals, so they don't have much financial wherewithal at all to do this. I suspect that the digital model is going to develop its own revenue model, and that it will gradually increase. I'm under the impression it will not fully replace the revenue from DVD and from television that has existed in the past, but it'll rise to a certain level. I could be dead wrong about this, but what I would suspect will end up happening is some variation of the following. You will see very big movies that go to the theaters that are widely promoted and are successful in the theaters and on other media simply because they're forces of nature. And independent films and films that use more of a digital delivery platform will need to control their costs very tightly. We've won a couple of Academy Awards on films that were budgeted in the $3 to $4 million range. That will be a very dangerous place to be going forward. I suspect that in order to make the digital revenue model work, movies will have to be made for significantly less than that. Now, on some level that's easier to do because of the technologies that exist now, but still really difficult. I mean, I've made a lot of movies for under $200,000 and a lot for under $1 million. And it's a lot easier to make a movie for under $1 million than for under 200,000, or at least a good movie. Although I will tell you that one of the best movies we have ever made was a movie that was made for $350,000 called Shelter, which won a bunch of awards, not widely seen. We didn't have the money to give it a broad theatrical release, nor did we think it would be successful, but it was an excellent movie and profitable. I think that independent filmmakers are going to need to bring their budgets even further down unless there is some sort of breakthrough in terms of the revenue model digitally. because it seems to be a very low model right now. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Yes.
I know you mentioned that you like big and small movies, and you mentioned a couple from the past couple years, but I was just wondering, what are some of your favorite movies of all time? I know it's a very tough question, but any that come to your mind.
Well, actually, I get asked it, so it's actually a question I'm
Or an easy question.
kind of prepared for, so thank you for asking. My favorite movie of all time is Lawrence of Arabia. Because it is a very personal story. It's complete hooey. It has nothing to do with what really happened with Lawrence of Arabia, but it is such an epic. And David Lean is one of the great directors of all time. And for some reason, I will watch that movie whenever it's on. I will also point out that it has no female speaking parts. I'm not saying that's why I like it. I'm just pointing that out. That's an interesting trivia factor that you can ask somebody who thinks they're a movie expert. Other than the women howling as the men go off to war. That's the only female speaking part in the entire movie. I like the Godfather movies. I like Chinatown. I like LA Confidential. I love film noir. And I like the old film noirs from the 50s that were done at that time, some in black and white, some in color. I like foreign films quite a bit. And there have been some very good ones. And I've gotten, it doesn't bother me to read a film. I can do that, and my mind can click in. And I know a lot of people do not like films with subtitles, but they don't bother me particularly. And some of the best films I've seen have been foreign films. I like It's a Wonderful Life. That's a film that always touches me whenever I see it. And there are probably, I'll tell you, one of the best movies that I really enjoy is The Searchers with John Wayne. I never knew John Wayne could act. And in this movie, he plays a very complex character. It is about the murder of his brother's family and the stealing of one of the daughters by the Indians and his, I think, 10-year search for her. And he is a nasty piece of work, but heroic in going after her. And you can't tell until the very end whether he's going to find her, to save her, or to kill her. And I've always liked that movie. It's a John Ford directed film. John Ford's house is 2 blocks from where I live in Bel Air. So that's a bit of Hollywood history. I enjoy driving by there. And I like the movies of John Ford. I like, the heroic westerns shot in Monument Valley. Those are good movies. I enjoy seeing those. So, those may be too old for most of you, but those are some of my favorites.
Yes, we have a question over there first. Lucia.
Can you talk a bit about the market for LGBT-related media in particular over the past years, past decade, how it's changed, and how your company, as like a particular distributor of that content, has responded to those changes?
Of what type of?
Of like LGBT and gay-related content?
Well, we sort of got involved in this accidentally. We made a film about 12 years ago called Gods and Monsters, which my business partner read and liked, but he was concerned that he liked it because he was gay and it had gay subject matter. It was about the last days of the director James Whale, who directed the early Frankenstein movies, and it had Ian McKellen and attached to act, and Bill Condon to direct. Bill at that point was not well known. His most famous movie was Candyman, Farewell to the Flesh. And since that time, he's produced the Academy Awards and won an Academy Award for Gods and Monsters, and also won an Academy Award for believe, Chicago for the screenplay. And we knew Brendan Fraser very well. He had acted with us before in a couple of films, so we got him to do it. And he said he would do it for the same price that Ian McKellen would work. And Ian McKellen we got for $125,000. And Brendan Fraser was making $7 million a picture at that point, so he agreed to work for $125,000. And we got Lynn Redgrave for $25,000. So that worked. And we were able to make the movie, and it was just one of those occasions where everything came together perfectly. It doesn't happen very often. It's only happened to me 2 or 3 times. All the movies we've made, where it just works. And we took the movie to Sundance, and everybody turned it down. Didn't get an offer for it. And we said, and I saw the movie, and I said, this is as good as we can do. This is as good a movie as I can make, and nobody wanted it. So we had a choice because Showtime had put in $1 million and could take it direct to cable unless we bought them out of the deal. So I had to write a check for $1 million to buy them out of the deal. And I drove around Beverly Hills and that area trying to make that decision as to whether that was the right thing to do. And I thought to myself, you know, this is a lot of money for me. But you only get so many chances like this, with a movie like this. And this really was as good as we could do. I could tell, even I could tell that this was pretty good. And then the movie went on to win the National Board of Review Award for Best Picture of the Year, ahead of Saving Private Ryan and Shakespeare in Love. It won a Golden Globe, an Academy Award, it won all the Independent Spirit Awards, and then all of a sudden everybody wanted it. And now we were experts on doing gay movies as a result of that one movie. And what we realized is there were, outside an occasional studio picture, not very many good independent gay films. They were not very good quality. And we felt we should try to get into this area and try to make some more of these movies. And this was a niche as an independent company that we could probably be effective in and have some success. And it worked. We began to make money doing this. And at that point, we were distributing these pictures, but it was very hard to find good movies. There were probably no more than 3 or 4 a year that were really interesting and really well done. And we didn't want to do pornography or anything like that. We wanted to do good quality movies aimed at this demographic. And we just became known for it. And we got lucky on a couple more pictures. We had a film that I suspect most of you have never heard of, called Sordid Lives, which was a big success for us. And it essentially was about a gay actor that goes back to his hometown in Texas to the funeral of his grandmother and decides that that's an appropriate time to tell everybody he's gay. And it is hysterical. It has Olivia Newton-John and Bonnie Bedelia and a really funny cast. And that movie ran in Palm Springs, where there's a substantial gay population, for 2 years. It ran in Dallas, of all places, for a year, and was a big success. And at that point, we were one of the 2 or 3 places, maybe the best place to go for gay distribution of gay films. And we started to distribute other people's films. And we came up with the idea that we should try to do a television network aimed at this demographic. But we figured out that all the cable services wanted at that point, they didn't want a linear service, they wanted a video on demand or subscription video on demand service. And that was what they were prepared to do, so you have to go the way the wind blows. And so that's what we did. And we started that service and we parlayed that into the other businesses and other assets, mainly because they were being incredibly poorly operated and run. And even guys like us who didn't know what we were doing could figure it out better than they could. And particularly the publishing business, which we knew nothing about. But that turned out to be an asset because we weren't locked into the conventional ways of thinking about print. We viewed print as an adjunct to digital, and we realized we needed to cut costs dramatically to make it work. To answer your question directly, very hard to make a good gay movie without being silly and making the characters ridiculous, or getting maudlin and depressing. Very hard to hit that right balance. Thank goodness that AIDS and HIV is not nearly the problem it once was, because I'll tell you, if I had to watch another movie about HIV, I was going to be terribly depressed, because that's what the movies were about, one right after another, and certainly an important subject. And for many years there, young gay men would go to funeral after funeral after funeral of their friends, and it was awful. And to their credit, the lesbian population and the straight female population really rose up to support their gay male friends during that time. And they deserve a lot of credit for what they did, because it was one death after another. But now, that epidemic, among gays at least, is largely under control, and so the movies now tend to be more where gay is incidental to the storyline, where you have a fireman who happens to be gay, and that'll obviously lead to certain consequences, or you'll have someone who's heroic or unheroic who's gay, and you're seeing gay be much more a part of the mainstream. And the real future of gay cinema is treating gay as a very normal human condition, and not something that the movie should be all about. And that's the change that we've seen recently, and I think that's probably, all in all, a decent change, a good change. It normalizes gay a bit more and makes it more acceptable. I'm still trying to find good lesbian movies. I can't find good lesbian movies to save my life. I don't know if any of you have seen the movie Bound, which is an awfully good thriller. And that movie is now almost 15 years old. I'd like to see another Bound. Because that is a sexy, provocative, well-done, well-acted thriller. And I haven't seen another lesbian movie of that quality for a thriller since that movie. So there's got to be another one out there. So that would be a good thing for one of you to make. It's really hard to find a good lesbian, strongly, well-acted movie that isn't silly. Or at least it's been hard for me.
Yes.
I just want to ask you mentioned about how great your assistant was. Right now she's in the executive position, but can you talk a little bit about what traits that you really admired her and thought that she was really doing a good job as an assistant?
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to ask you to repeat. I didn't quite catch the question. What was the question again, please?
The question is just like, what are the traits that you really liked about your assistant?
The traits that I liked about our assistant.
Right, because I think a lot of us are graduating seniors and we're all started working probably as an assistant. So my question is just like, what are the...
Well, I hope you don't, but you may.
We might.
You know, I liked her no-nonsense attitude and her seriousness about her job. And she has a wicked sense of humor. She's the only one that can go up against my partner Paul, who's gay and quick as can be, and can come back with something right back at him. But her seriousness and the fact that she wanted to do a good job and it meant everything to her. And you know, I usually work until 7, 7:30, 8 o'clock at night, and she was still there, still working. And also her ability to take over responsibility for highly complex matters. And I wouldn't always agree with the approach, but I wanted to hear her opinion all the time. The girl was just smart. A bit odd by her own acknowledgement, but smart, smart, smart. And she would She's the only person I know who can edit my work effectively and help improve it. So, many of you have an opportunity, if that ends up being your lot and your direction, to just be calm, methodical, hardworking, and smart as can be. Because if you're those things, you're going to be an executive very quickly. Because there is a real lack of people like that who are just solid, rock solid. And she is rock solid. And she will do what she needs to do, and in a very unflashy way. You don't need somebody giggling all the time and trying to be cute. You need somebody who can do the job.
Yes, Jeff?
To go back to your story about gods and monsters and Brendan Fraser willing to take a big cut in salary to participate in the film. I don't know the specifics about his deal there, but obviously one of the things that independent films were able to do is on occasion attract big stars by offering them some type of profit participation on the back end. But part of what you're saying is that that back end is kind of dwindling, so have we seen the last of stars essentially working for scale or taking a big cut in salary to make independent films?
The short answer is no. I think you'll still see that because good quality material will attract talent. And they don't get, the average highly compensated star may only be in 20 movies in their whole career. It isn't like the days of the studio system where they would work in 100, 150 movies, 60 movies, whatever it was, if they had a long career. It is very hard for them to find good things. One of the things they have to fight through is that their agents are compensated and their managers, which most of them have both now, are compensated as a percentage of their income, and so they're not going to encourage them unless it's a particularly prescient agent who understands that this part will be important to their career. Brendan Fraser, still, if you interview him today, he will say that is the part he's most proud of in his career. And that's what really had him recognized as a real actor. He did an excellent job in that film, playing a part where he basically is very flat most of the picture, but it was absolutely the right energy for that. By the way, in the interest of full disclosure, I should tell you, and I forgot about this, as I was describing that, because I wanted to be somewhat brief, although it may not seem that way. Ian and Brendan had each bonuses of $200,000 each if we hit a certain box office level. And they earned their bonuses and were paid their bonuses. Lynn did not have that because she was in no demand whatsoever. And I don't know if you've seen the movie, but her performance is extraordinary in that movie, and she deserved the Golden Globe. She probably should have won the Academy Award that year, and it was really disappointing that she did not, because she probably deserved it. It was probably the best performance. And she's almost unrecognizable in that movie. And we gave her a bonus anyway, and she was also going through a very, very tough divorce at that time. And so we gave her a place to live during that time because she didn't know where to go. So we had an apartment in Santa Monica, and so she lived there for about a year and became a very good friend, and we did 2 more movies with her. Brendan wanted to act with Ian McKellen. He considered Ian McKellen the best actor, out there. And I would have to say in all the movies I've done, I've never worked with a better actor or a more gracious gentleman than Ian McKellen. We did the premiere of the movie in London, and we did a little party for him and for the other stars. And he was the one actor that at the end, before he left, made sure he came up and thanked us all for doing this, and is just of the old school, where you're thankful for the work, and he could not have been more gracious. And he will also, if asked, will point to that movie and say that's the movie that gave him Lord of the Rings and X-Men and all these other things that he's gone on to do. And, you know, when he did that movie, he's made up to look much older than he really is. And he was in his late 50s when he did that movie, and he was made up to look, you know, 70s. And clearly the best actor I've ever worked with. I've never seen anybody even better. So, I don't think that's going to go away. But we're in a very interesting time where the revenue models are changing, and I can't predict the future. I just observe it and try to bob and weave and deal with it as best I can. But I think we'll continue to see that. You know, Bruce Willis is another fellow who, you know, you look at his career, he has worked in a lot of supporting parts, a lot of small parts, very smart. You know, and John Travolta a little bit that way too. These guys could get paid a lot of money, but Bruce Willis, if he sees something good, and he's been in some awful movies too, but if he sees something good, he will do it, and as a result, he's had a long and very diversified career. It's just a smart thing to do, but an actor has to overcome sometimes his counselors in order to do that kind of work.
We have time for one more question. Yes.
What's just the mundane aspect of living in Beverly Hills? I've been there once. I didn't go to the celebrity areas, but I mean, it's a place where people live too, and people don't just work.
Well, I actually live in Bel Air,
Okay.
and I live in the slums of Bel Air.
There's such things?
There. Be more modestly priced houses that I could actually afford. But I love my house there, and it has a nice view of downtown and Century City, and it has a nice patio. I can sit outside and read every night. I don't know many people outside of my street, my cul-de-sac, and my neighbors. I know them all pretty well. I rarely meet any stars other than people that happen to be in our movies. I rarely go to parties. I don't have the time. You know, I'm running, you know, we have, 60, 70 employees. I also have other businesses that I still own interests in that I have to run. I have real estate businesses and things like that. I work very hard. I read a great deal. I love to read, and for me, a nice evening is to go home and read a detective novel or read something that might give me an idea for a movie. I also read 10 to 15 scripts every couple of weeks. I would say probably 30 a month, 20 to 30 probably. And so I don't have much time to do that. I tend to lead a very normal life. I don't know many stars. I don't meet them very often. I don't really care. If we're going to be working with them or there's some reason to, fine. But every now and then you bump into somebody. You're living in Los Angeles. You see people. Because of our involvement in gay media and we've won a bunch of awards for the work we've done there. And one of my most interesting moments was when we were getting an award, and Faye Dunaway gave us the award. I don't know if you know who she is, but she's been around a while. And she was one of my favorite actresses from Chinatown, and she actually held my hand while she was giving me the award, and that was very exciting. It doesn't take much. I also, at one party I went to, got to shake hands back to back and spend some time talking to Sean Connery and Michael Caine. And that was really exciting for me. I don't know either of them. Probably the nicest guy I've met and spent time with is Tom Hanks, and he's the most down to earth. But I don't know him very well. He wouldn't invite me to a party, I don't think. And I don't know if I'd go if he would invite me. I really don't care. Sean Connery's really big. He's
Big?
Yeah, he's tall. He's a big guy. He's about 6'3", 6'4".
I was assuming they're shorter than they.
Well, most of them are shrimps.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Almost every actor you meet is about half the size of a real person. One of the classics is, I don't know if anyone reads the Lee Child novels about his hero, Jack Reacher. Now, Lee Child's a very popular novelist, and Jack Reacher is a 6'5" former military policeman who goes from town to town saving people and helping people and solving crimes. Of course, he's going to be played in the movie by Tom Cruise, who is all of 5'6½" in his lifts. So that's typical Hollywood. But a lot of these guys are really short. They really are little guys. What's his name? Josh Brolin. He's like a mini person. He's like a midget. He's married to Diane Lane, who's very short and taller than him. But they shoot him. If you saw No Country for Old Men or Wall Street Money Never Sleeps, they shoot him to make him look bigger. But he's like a little person. So it's interesting. But I don't meet many of these people other than when they're in our movies. And I'll meet them. Most of the people we use are TV stars. But TV and movies intermingle a lot more than they ever have in the past. So it tends to be kind of the same people sometimes.
Thank you very much, Steve.
You're welcome.